Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views, excuse me, with myself, Salah Loma Kwidiri. The time is 9:47 Central African time, and we're going to be switching gears now to a very, very important story. As the world marks World AIDS Day, and as South Africa participates in the 16 Days of Activism campaign against gender based violence, we're going to be confronting a double crisis: HIV and AIDS and gender based violence. Two epidemics that feed into each other and hit women and girls the hardest in our country. There's a new global call to action recently underlined by Project Hope, which warns that violence against women remains one of the biggest barriers to ending HIV and AIDS. Survivors are more likely to contract HIV, less likely to access treatment, and often unable to seek vital care due to fear or stigma. And here at home in South Africa, the fight, I think we can all agree, isn't just about medicine or therapy. It's more about safety. It's about dignity. It's about rights and structural change. And to help us unpack what needs to happen, we're joined by Yolaan Andrews from NACOSA, who works at the intersection of community-driven HIV prevention, gender-based violence response, and human rights. Good morning, Yolaan. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having NACOSA represent.
No, the pleasure's all ours. I think we'll jump right into it. Globally, Yolanda, and locally, we've heard that gender-based violence isn't just a side effect. It is often a driver of HIV and AIDS. How does NACOSA see this link playing out on the ground in South African communities, especially among the hardest hit young women and girls of South Africa?
So, NACOSA is a networking organization. So, we have several district implementers that we support and partner with. We have community based organizations who are on the ground that are experiencing these, hard hits in terms of gender based violence, but also in how it relates to access to HIV and other health services. And so what we're seeing on the ground is that, this patriarchal society and the lack of, consistency in service delivery, and also the reliance we have on overseas funding creates barriers for young women to actually access services, but not only access, but continuously retain and those services to increase their uptake, but also increase their adherence to treatment that will prevent them from getting HIV.
Very, very important. According to recent data, survivors of gender-based violence are significantly more likely to contract HIV, but also less likely to stay on treatment or to access services because of the stigma and just the general fear, or lack of safe spaces where they can do so. What would you say, from you guys' observations, are some of the biggest obstacles that survivors of gender-based violence face when it comes to HIV prevention, and most importantly, care after they are found to have contracted HIV?
I think one of the biggest issues is around lack of education, and also a lack of education of their rights. They have a right to sexual reproductive health services. They have a right to access post-exposure prophylaxis, which is called PEP. They have a right to access that within 72 hours. But the reality is a lot of this information is not shared with young people, and especially in our rural or peri-urban areas. So they don't know about accessing this to prevent them from contracting HIV. But also think about it, where are the services based? Usually in far distances, especially in our rural areas. And they don't necessarily have the financial means, or they're disempowered financially by those that have authority over them, so they don't have the opportunities or resources to access these services. And so those are one of the main issues as well around it. But I want to also say it's about the power of peer pressure and the power of men over their decision making authority and powers to actually say, I have a right and I'm actually going to access this, when they constantly push down in terms of what they're allowed to do.
Mm, mm, mm. Um, interventions. We're living in 2025. Information seems to be, at everyone's click of a button, click of a hand, but you still have many cases arising, especially from young girls, teenagers, where they still find themselves being victims of gender-based violence that goes unreported. They still find themselves contracting HIV and AIDS, and as you mentioned, it's because they can't access the information and some of these remedial kind of actions that they can implement. What do we do as a community? How do we go about educating and creating these safe spaces where there wouldn't be a need to feel like you're the one that's wrong when you've been sexually assaulted or raped, or it's a stigma to be HIV and AIDS, because HIV and AIDS has been in our communities for so long, but it seems we are failing to just break the stigma, to say it does happen. You can contract HIV and AIDS, and it doesn't mean that you're promiscuous or you don't care for your safety and for your health. It can be for many other reasons. Why can't we break that wall, and how can we break it for young people especially?
So NACOSA is incredibly respectful of cultures
Mm,
and community dynamics, but the reality is that a lot of the time cultures and community stigma prevents young people from accessing this information and prevents real change within the community to take on board, some of this, changing of mindsets. So we've relied heavily on peer-to-peer education. So young
mm,
people talking to young people. We rely heavily on our community leaders, our ward councillors, our traditional leaders, our traditional healers, in terms of creating mind change through their communities, also faith-based organizations, understanding exactly what you described, that one has a choice in your body and the services you access, and that is not a call to be sexually violated or physically violated. I think also what we need to look at is, changing as well the conversation about gender transformation and understanding gender dynamics amongst young people, older men, young boys as well, because they do hold power over women in a sense. And that has to change by them themselves as men and young boys, changing their mindset and understanding sexual consent, understanding that women have a right over their bodies and their minds.
mm. How do we start having those conversations? South Africa is still relatively a conservative country. You mentioned, we're still very, very traditional. Others are still very religious when it comes to their approach on life. And for many parents, whether it's parents or educators, starting those kind of conversations with, young people could be difficult. How do you start? How do you go about it? Because it's very, very important.
Yeah. So, I sometimes get confused about the idea that we are a conservative country because we have such progressive policies.
Mm,
We have such progressive programs. We are held in esteem by other countries in terms of our progression. But you're right, when it comes down to it behind closed doors, parents are concerned about having the conversation. And as I said before, we rely heavily on peer-to-peer conversations. So we have young people talking to young people. The same should apply for others. Men should be talking to men about, not necessarily taking advantage of young women and their financial needs, and reliance on men. Boys should be talking to boys about the definition of sexual consent. Parents should be talking to parents. And we've seen this work very well in a lot of the South African towns that we work in and districts that we work in, that when peer to peer, regardless of age, regardless of gender, are talking to each other, you see change of mindset and you see real change in those communities, especially in the communities where we work with gender-based violence through our previous PEPFAR programs and Global
mm,
Fund programs.
mm. Well, there you go, Yolaan Andrews. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you so much.
There you go. Going to take a quick break. News and views continues after this.